I will call to order a regular meeting of the Planning Commission. Phyllis, do you want to do roll call?
Sure. Chairperson Bob McCool.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Lisa Ritchie.
Here.
Commissioners Phyllis Sarden here. David Harper.
Here.
Jerry Malia.
Here.
Dan Miller.
Here.
Steve Whitty.
Here.
Planner Stephen Williams.
Here.
Attorney Allie Slayton.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, so we have time for public comment on any consent agenda or non-agenda items. We don't have a consent, or yeah, we don't have a consent agenda tonight, but if there's any non-agenda items outside of the recommendations for ordinance consideration that we're doing tonight, I will entertain that. You can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. I think it's *9 on the, if you're on a phone, right? And, otherwise, we're just going to move on. And all right, seeing none. We have a pretty easygoing meeting, so if something comes up, we'll try to watch for hands being raised. All right, so agenda item is discussion and consideration of a recommendation for an ordinance regarding accessory dwelling units or ADUs. This isn't a public hearing, so this is just a discussion about the writing of the ordinance that is provided. Stephen, do you have any type of presentation or discussion or start of discussion?
I mean, I can do as little or as much as you guys want. We can kind of just pull up the ordinance and go over it. This was something that was prepared by our, our town attorney. So Allie may have more input and insight tonight than I do. But, the direction was given, we basically looked at the City of Golden's accessory dwelling unit ordinance in September. And we had a number of tweaks to it. I don't know if you guys have much in the way of outstanding questions or, perspective to provide, but I think maybe the easiest thing would be to just start with, unless you want a refresher, in which case I can pull up the presentation from September and we can kind of just go over it to understand where we landed, or I think that maybe the easiest thing would be to go over the ordinance and then, walk backwards if we need to. So it depends on what you guys feel is best. Or
Is the latter okay with everybody?
Yeah, agreed.
Just work through it. Okay.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yep, agreed.
Allie, I'm happy to defer to you, or I'm happy to kind of go through it if you'd rather have me go through it, but I can pull up my screen and then you can just kind of prompt me to walk through it if you like.
Okay. Well, I don't care. So Dan drafted this, but he's gone over it with me. You were there for the September meeting. I was not. So it might be better for you to go through and I can fill in where necessary, because I know you did have those questions this morning, which we answered. So I can fill in with some of those answers. Does that work for you?
That works for me, yeah. So I'll share my screen and we'll just kind of walk through it like we did with the City of Golden's ordinance in September, and you guys can provide direction or head nods or whatever. We can just kind of take it one step at a time. Good. So I will share my screen, hopefully.
Thanks, Steve. And I was just looking at my notes from that September 15th meeting, and I was actually absent at that meeting. So I'm in the same boat as you, Allie.
Can you guys see the screen all right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So basically this is, the ordinance, and then it'll get adjusted, but we have a resolution that the Planning Commission would act on, and this is the ordinance that we'd be recommending to the town board. So it is, the intent obviously is to permit accessory dwelling units within single family and 2-family dwelling units in residential zone districts. One of the questions I had for Dan and the group this morning was whether or not this was restricted to original town this way and to RM and RL zoning, and whether or not we needed that kind of clarification. And the response I received was we didn't, that technically the PD zoning isn't residential zoning. So that would be something I would have needed clarification on in order to interpret it this way. So I don't know that we don't want some massaging, just so that we have it abundantly clear to, maybe a future planner or something like that as to where this applies. But that was one of the questions I had. So, but Kendra was able to clarify that the intent now is for this to be, or as drafted, it's for it to apply to just the original town zoning, which is RM and RL. And if you wanted to change that, you can, or if the board wants to change it, they can. But as it's drafted, that's the confines of this first whereas.
Stephen, can I ask you a question about this? It says single family and two family dwelling units. Is that because two family dwelling units are allowed in single family residential in the RL zoning?
No, I think the discussion we had last time, from what I recall, and I didn't get through the whole meeting today when I was reviewing it, but my recollection is that we discussed whether or not we wanted to keep adding it on, and I think we just drew the line at two family units. So if there is a duplex and there's actually space, of course, this is one of those things that is kind of a push and pull with, if you have a duplex, like you have the duplexes at 4th and William, they're built at nearly 40% lot coverage anyway, so they can't have accessory dwelling unit. But if there was a lot that didn't hit that 40% requirement already, and it was built as a duplex and they had space for an accessory dwelling unit, the discussion that we had in September thought that, we're not in the business of adding we just drew the line at a duplex. We could draw it. Technically, the RN zoning allows for multifamily. We don't really have a cap at that. It's mostly just density that drives that down. And the only thing that we've seen built on a 7,000 or 6,000 square foot lot in original town is two. We don't have a triplex in town. So this is probably more geared towards just what's existing and what's practical within original town.
But RL, the lowest, that only
Right.
allows.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, didn't answer that. No, the RL only allows for single family.
Family.
So
Okay.
this would allow for one additional unit within the RL zoning, technically, but again, at an ADU, not as a duplex.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So when we go through this
Yes.
and we get further into it, you see the size limitations. It's based on either the size of the house or the allowed square footage, whichever is less. That language is in section 2 under 16.6.160. We'll get to that here in a second in terms of the size limits. Any other questions on this first whereas? Or
I
do
agree with
guys have-
you. I
ahead.
agree with you. I think for clarification, I don't want a future planner or a resident who finds this to, kind of run down a path. I don't know why we wouldn't just be explicit and say RL and RM zone districts.
Okay.
I agree.
But my only concern about that is you're likely to get you could easily get a lot of pushback from people who live in, I know we talked about that, but in considering it afterwards, I was trying to figure out why we wouldn't just apply this to the whole of Superior.
I think we could. I think we would need to do more outreach, and I don't know that the board is expecting that at this time.
And I can see, I'm not sure why anybody would favor singling out one small area that's actually a very small area of the town. If your object is to provide more affordable accommodation, just making this available in original town is really not the way to go.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, it takes them out of the Northwest area plan, so I think that's why it's in the direction that it went. I don't think I have an issue with it being expanded, but I think that's what the board's expecting, and because of the direction it came, I think it was this area. I guess, would that include Sagamore too, Stephen? Or, not that there's room to do it, but well.
No, Sagamore is its own PD. So based on the definition that we got, it's not. The one, I guess, clarification I'd provide, and we've done this all under the context that, like I just discussed, like if you have a single family home or a duplex that covers 40% of your lot, you're not going to get an accessory dwelling unit. So we've kind of worked with the context of original town zoning in order to craft these. If it was to apply to, those type of supplementary kind of restrictions don't apply in Rock Creek, for instance. So I think we'd have to look at Rock Creek kind of specifically and see how that works.
They could go up, right? They could, I don't know all the housing styles in Rock Creek, but whether you could put a unit on top of a garage or not, that isn't already there, or could be converted to an accessory dwelling unit, right? Above a garage or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, I think Rock Creek, you'd more likely see like a basement conversion.
Basement.
Right.
Internal,
Right.
Similar maybe in Sagamore. But I'm with Stephen right now. I think it would be amazing to have through town, but I don't think we drafted this particular language with that in mind. So
We have your work plan to discuss later, so if they want to
there you go.
expand this elsewhere, I mean, I think that we could look at it, like
Yeah.
if that's the direction they give, then we can certainly kind of phase this in and expand it as appropriate.
I thought we also, just remembering that meeting, I thought we had this exact same discussion and we decided to keep it just for Old Town and not make it apply to the rest of Superior. I thought we,
That's what I remember.
this conversation is very similar to what we had, I thought.
Yeah, I don't know that we had firm direction on anything, but I think that's where everyone was leaning to. Yeah, and I'm not being critical. I'm just saying
Yeah.
it was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
discussion more than a direction, and I think the direction is coming tonight. So
Okay, very good.
Well, and I think something else to reinforce that is that Original Town doesn't have an HOA. All the other areas around Superior have HOAs attached to them that would be another issue to grapple with.
right, and I think that once this is made public that this was allowed here, then if HOAs are interested in allowing it, like in Sagamore or in Rock Creek or whatever, then we have an avenue now that they can explore it. But it would obviously have to be, kind of site specific and geared towards their particular PD.
Right.
Just for clarification, I don't think Sagamore has an HOA, although we are under a PD.
Right. Yeah. So, or the neighbors, just speaking generally. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to see this move forward for Original Town. And then if the board or residents or we want to take up the rest of town, I would love to kind of continue that, but I don't want to pause on this for that.
Yeah,
So
agreed.
That's my thought.
Gonna move on.
Sure.
Yep.
So the second whereas just kind of clarifies that this new section of the code that we're going to get to will need to be adopted. And then section 1, again, just kind of outlines that. And then section 16.6.160 is where this would fit into our current code. Just kind of outlines that accessory dwelling units are permitted as accessory structures to single family and 2-family dwellings in residential zone districts. And then they're subject to the following. So number 1 is that only one ADU shall be permitted for each single family or 2-family home on a lot. So pretty straightforward. I don't know if you guys have any questions on that or not, and we can kind of switch back and forth if you want to look at what we are working off of as a context. I don't know that I could do a split screen, but I could switch back to the gold. I have the golden regs pulled up if you guys ever want to go back and look at that for comparison. Otherwise, we talked about size, and where we landed on was for a principal dwelling unit of 1,000 square feet or more, the ADU shall be no larger than 50% of the square feet of the principal dwelling, or 800 square feet, whichever is smaller. So if you had a 2,000 square foot house, it's going to be 800 square feet. If you had something that was 1,500, it would be 750 and be a little bit less than that 800 allowance based on that, whichever is smaller language. And then if you had a principal dwelling unit that was less than 1,000 square feet, the ADU shall be no larger than 500 square feet. And then we have this additional language that no ADU shall be less than 200 square feet. And I think that in the review of the video that I had today, I didn't think we had a minimum. And there is no, I did confirm with the building department and building regulations that there is no square footage minimum for an accessory dwelling unit. It's just the elements that have to be there. So you have to have bathing, cooking, and living or sleeping facilities in every, for it all to qualify as an accessory dwelling unit. So just by default of having all of those, you're going to have a certain size area, but people doing this stuff at like 100 and 120 square feet in this day and time, and we didn't really feel like there was any impact to. So the smaller the unit, the fewer folks are going to actually live there. We talked about and we get into that later in terms of how many people can reside in a dwelling unit. We set a limit of 3, but the smaller it goes, the less impactful they'll have, the less chances of them having more than one car, that type of stuff.
Can you repeat the 3? What were the 3 requirements? Sleeping, bath, and
So it's sleeping, bathing, and cooking. So, but
And you
and
don't
then
there just have to be areas for those. It can be a studio, right? I mean,
it could be a studio. Yeah, you just have those functions. So for like, you know, you can't have a half bath and have a bathing component. You can't have a you know, a kitchen without a stove, and it actually. So the stove is what kind of drives the kitchen. You could have a refrigerator and a sink, and that's really not a kitchen until you're able to cook in it. And then, you know, for sleeping, it's there's just certain elements to the building code, you know, about egress and stuff like that that apply to a sleeping facility. And there's also the element of sprinklering. When you have, like, if you're going to do a addition over your garage and it's supposed to be for an office and it doesn't have, like, it's not supposed to be used for a sleeping facility, then you don't necessarily trigger like fire sprinkling. But fire sprinkling comes into play when someone's intended to sleep there, because if a fire happens and you're sleeping, you need to, that fire suppression system is more critical than if you're awake and working or whatever you're expected to be able to get out of the house. So those things
Would
are
this
solved.
trigger sprinklers? So if somebody's doing an interior conversion?
So not for an interior conversion, based on, well, if the existing house was built with sprinklers, any addition has
Right.
to be sprinklered.
Okay,
If it's a house that wasn't sprinklered to begin with, it doesn't necessarily trigger it. But a
Okay.
net new addition for a detached structure would.
right.
So that's the answers I got from Ernie. So that was
Cool.
helpful.
No, thank you. That's helpful.
yeah, there's-
This particular size restriction, this paragraph is identical to the one in the golden regs.
right. So are you suggesting we don't limit it to 200 square feet, or we do?
That's the recollection I have from our meeting in September, is that we don't need it. But so if you guys want to not have that requirement,
Okay, just have to satisfy the sleeping.
correct.
I mean,
Yeah, as long as it meets building codes for the required spaces. I don't know that you
Okay.
need this.
all right.
I'm not sure I agree with. I mean, 200 square feet is 20 by 10. And we're saying that you could let 3 people, later on, we say we let 3 people live in it. I mean, 20 by 10 is about the same size as an RV.
Yeah, I
Yep.
know families that live in RVs. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, it's really up to, I doubt that 3 people would want to live in a 10 by 20 room, but maybe.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you're getting down to something that's the size of a vehicle, I think that's getting below what I'd really consider to be a dwelling unit, because we're saying later on the mobile homes don't count.
And so what's the actual issue? I mean, is it a personal opinion, or is it is there a functional concern, or is there a work? I mean, there needs to kind of be a reason why we wouldn't do it. Is there something that's of concern?
Well, I saw this when I read it earlier today and thought that's a good idea to have a minimum requirement, particularly because we go later on into the RVs and the mobile home things. I guess this is an area of miniature houses and those kind of things, but no, it's really it's a reaction rather than a thought out consideration. But if you give me time, I can probably come up with some considerations.
My thought on this is we don't have a minimum dwelling unit size for a principal dwelling ever, is provided as long as it meets the building code. So I don't think we're going to see very many, but I also, as long as it's safe, I don't know that we're creating a problem by taking this out.
Well, and I think if you think about it the other way, to think if there's only one person in there, then being less than 200 could be acceptable, right?
Yeah.
I agree with David that 3 people and 200 seems crazy. Again, I wouldn't want to live there, but I think of it the other way. If there is only one person in there being less than 200, then maybe that is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, my gut says leave it, since we don't have principal dwelling unit requirements. I mean, if we want to change, it needs to probably change for that as well.
You're saying leave it
Yeah.
in there or take it out?
I'd say take it out because there's no minimum currently required for primary dwelling units. So
Okay.
if you put it on this, then why wouldn't you put it on primary dwelling units? And if we want to do that, then let's go back and revisit that another time and address.
Well, because I think there's a difference between a primary dwelling unit and an ADU, additional dwelling unit. I mean, nobody's going to build I can't think of, well, unless you're going into these tiny houses thing, I can't see anybody building a.
But they can. That's my point. They probably won't build an ADU either, but they can. I mean, to say, I don't know. If we want to change it, let's change it. And change it across the board, I would think. I mean, I don't know. It just seems weird to stick the requirement on an ADU and not address the primary dwelling unit just because we think somebody won't do it. Somebody probably won't build an ADU. Well, I don't know. Maybe a better chance they'll build a small ADU, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that I care much. I can let it go.
So, Stephen, how does the language relate between the minimum square footage and the number of residents in the ADU?
But there is no correlation or direct correlation between the square footage of either a house or so the ADU has a 3, I think it's down further.
Maximum. I had it pulled up
So,
on my
yeah.
screen, but I can't get to it because of the Zoom.
It's on number 5 here. So occupancy, no more than 3 persons shall occupy an ADU at any time.
So if you had the smallest ADU, according to this, at 200 square feet, you could legally have 3 people in there.
Good. Yep.
And if we take it out, you could have a 100 square foot ADU and 3 people as long as you can
Live comfortable.
bathroom, the kitchen, and the bedroom.
Find 3 people that want to live together.
I
I
lived
can
in a,
imagine it's going to happen, but
yeah,
we talk about attainable and affordable and places for people to live. And, if somebody wants to spend $400 a month on a 100 square foot ADU, and then they meet a boyfriend, they want to move in together for a little while. I mean, it just gets weird, right? I mean, we either we allow it across the board or we don't, is what it seems like. But I don't care that much. I'm fine with leaving it in or taking it out. It just seems odd to leave it in.
I generally agree. I mean, without a requirement for effectively there would be kind of a ratio here between a principal unit and a ADU. When you have an ADU, by default in this, section of the code, that it can't be more than 50%. So if you had a principal unit that was 200 square feet, you're only going to get a 200 square foot ADU, but I don't think we're going to get into that scenario. But generally the purpose here and the intent is just that you have a primary unit that's identifiable and visibly larger than the accessory unit. And I think you get that either way, but
yeah.
So.
Well, and to Commissioner Harper's point, a lot of developers that would move into some of these infill lots in original town and build a new structure and possibly consider an ADU, would be more inclined to build the house, the primary residence, to its maximum, which may impede the ability of having an ADU because you don't have any land left. Because the primary residence is worth more, and to build a 4,000 foot house, 3,200 square foot house, and not have an ADU, or have a large house like that with an ADU above the garage.
Yeah.
But I think any developer that's going to come into original town is going to really look to maximize that primary residence. That accessory dwelling would be an afterthought as a benefit for the homeowner down the road, as a means to make income on their property, or put their grandparents back there or something like that. I like the minimum of 200.
I mean, this would be eligible for a variance, right? So if there's a unique situation, Stephen, that somebody comes in with, where we've got something unique that's warranted, they could go through a variance process. So that could be an outlet for that.
Be smaller?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose.
I mean, if there really is a unique circumstance that justifies a hardship due to lot size or configuration or existing conditions or what have you. So I guess, knowing that there's a relief valve for it, I'd be fine with keeping it in if it, makes folks more comfortable.
I guess I'll weigh in. Philosophically, I don't like things in ordinance that the market can dictate or other ordinance can dictate. Like you already mentioned, the building code might address really a minimum square foot size anyway. So it's either seems redundant or like we are trying to just legislate size for not a particularly good reason. But on the other hand, I don't think it's a big deal, and there probably won't be any built under 200 square feet regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it seems like we're kind of split down the middle here.
I can go either way. I don't have a preference.
Yeah, I mean, I just agree. It just seems redundant. We don't put it in. I mean, yeah, just seems like if we're gonna put in a minimum, we should do that across the board, but.
So there used to be one in the building code and now there's not. So, and it really is just one of those things that, gets changed, building code gets updated and we adopt a new code. But I don't think we've had, I don't know, I think the last building code, it's now 2018. I think the last one was 2012 and my recollection is it didn't have it either, a minimum. So.
I mean, if you have a requirement for those three areas, and it might be worth at that code, because I presume there are some requirements there. You have to be able to move around a kitchen. You have to be able to walk through.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
there are minimums. So you have to have a sleeping area. You have to have a kitchen area, and you have to have a bathroom. You have to be able to move around in it, and that in and of itself defines the minimum size of a unit, right? So it is defined. I mean, you can't make anything smaller than what our code says you can build. It's already there. So to throw in a different square footage just seems odd.
It may seem odd, but I used to live, when I first graduated, I lived in a bed sitting room which had all the requirements for an ADU and was less than 200 square feet. But it was just one of me. And I sure as hell, I suppose I could have had a girlfriend in there occasionally, but she sure as hell wouldn't have wanted to live with me there. So I think
So why should we deprive other students from the same privilege?
And why aren't you changing it for the
3 people?
Yeah, why don't you change it to the primary?
I think the message that this sends is that an ADU is supposed to be a serious size, not just a bed sitting room.
I'm not trying to send that message, but
No, I don't.
I'm not.
I don't either. I think the intent is to allow flexibility.
Yeah, I'm not trying to send any kind of message like that. I mean, I was walking through IKEA, and I mean, boy, that 145 square foot room, that, I mean, sleeping, bath, and it was amazing. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd lean toward taking it out and just relying on the building code for egress and ingress and safety and getting around. And I mean,
If we want to change it, then let's change it for the code, not just for ADUs. That's my.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to discussing changing it for primaries either. So.
Right. So are we moving on to 3?
Sure. So 3 is just design and development standards. So that basically means, building code, planning regulations. The accessory dwelling unit shall meet the same development standards required for the principal dwelling unit. If an entrance to an ADU is visible from an adjacent street, the entrance shall be designed in a manner to be clearly subordinate to the entrance for the principal dwelling. So this was the only kind of design standard that we kept. We didn't require anything with architecture matching the building, and we didn't have any concern. There were some things in the golden regulations about window placement, just to be mindful of placing windows in relation to neighboring properties and stuff like that. And our discussion in September decided that those elements weren't necessary. And then this is just a kind of a general statement that landscaping will be provided for both ADU and the principal dwelling unit. I don't know, that seems pretty general.
Yeah, I had a question, like, what are our single family landscaping standards in original town? Like, what does this mean? Like, do we, like, you have to plant a tree? Like,
There are
Right
not.
down the street's got rock around the whole thing.
yeah, so I think unless we have landscaping standards that we can point to, I don't like this.
Yeah, I
sentence.
think the intent is just like open space or like, there needs to be a yard for both elements, but so landscaping may not be the right term to apply here.
Like separate outdoor space or
Or
something.
shared
If
outdoor
that-
space
yeah.
or whatever, yeah. So it's
If
just,
that's the intent, I think this needs changed. My other concern on this is our code doesn't call these design and development standards. Like maybe that's what Golden calls it, but I was looking in our code. And this is just me being nitpicky, but our code calls these like schedule of requirements that includes bulk, setback, density, intensity. So I, just for clarity, would recommend that we refer to terms in our own code rather than a more vague term.
Right.
So it's clear that it needs to meet setbacks and lot coverage and what have you.
yeah, I think that's a good catch because we don't have any design standards for original town in particular. It's really development and building code standards. So
Yeah,
Oh.
so it's like reference, I think it's like 16, what is it? It's just called the Schedule of Requirements for Residential Districts.
Schedule of uses and requirements, is that it? 16.6.120?
Yeah, it's within there. So yeah, exactly. So the Schedule of Requirements has like the setbacks and lot coverage and things. So I guess I would just lean on the city attorney and Stephen to maybe just make sure that's tighter.
I
Okay.
think landscaping is tough because if you do an above the garage, that doesn't really come into play so much, but
Yeah, I mean, I think if the intent is to have separate outdoor space, then we should, we should say that.
yeah, if
I
it's a
don't remember
separate
if we
building,
talked about that.
if it's a separate building, does that fall in? I mean, it would be nice if we just refer back to the building code as we do in number 2, right? So if some landscaping is required, if you're building an additional unit, then the requirement's probably going to be different than if you're putting a
So,
unit up your garage.
the discussion that I remember from the last meeting was that, by default, you're going to have a certain amount of open space because you only have 40% of lot coverage. So I think we felt comfortable at that time that there would be open space or outdoor space. I think the intent of this, as I recall, is just to have an outdoor area available for both the AD unit and the single family home. And I don't think we got into the nuances of whether or not that could just be shared or they had access to it. And it's one of those things that's like, how do you actually regulate that somebody allows them to use their yard? Or
Yeah,
so it's just a tricky one. So
I'd
I don't
propose just striking the last sentence and not going there.
Yeah.
okay.
That's
I think
just
that's
me.
kind of where we landed last time. And I remember Commissioner Harper doing the math and saying, we have 60% of the rest of the lot that's going to be open, and how we regulate whether or not someone allows, shares that space or whatnot is going to be tricky. So, okay. So we'll just strike that sentence.
I mean, that's my preference. I'm not sure if everyone else's agree.
Yeah.
Everyone else agrees.
And I'm okay. I think that it's a little subjective, what the entrance looks like, but I think that's a reasonable thing to say.
Yeah, I guess I was going to ask staff, do you feel like you can administer that? Like, do you have an idea of like what clearly subordinate is, or would you rather lean on something more specific?
The only time I've had to apply something like that was in Boulder County, and they actually didn't allow it to face so, if you have and that's the tricky thing too, is like, we have a lot of residential units now that are being designed where you don't see the front door from the street, because it's like, you go up the steps and it's kind of parallel to the street or whatever. And so without those design standards in place, it's a little tricky but the intent is for that second door not to be visible from the street. But if you have one of those doors, does that mean that second door has to be in the rear or off the side or something? So it is, what we have to do. Lisa knows we have to deal with kind of like, you're trying to meet the intent of a code versus, a strict I'm
Yeah,
not too
sometimes
concerned
it's
about
good
it,
to have
but
the flexibility, but
yeah.
other times it's nice to have like, nope, here's your hard line that you can't cross. But
yeah.
I'm okay with the flexibility. You guys are the one administering it, so just make sure you are good with
Well,
flexibility.
I'm fine with it as long as I know kind of what everyone, I mean, it's not our regulation, so I don't want to be interpreting something, that this is planning commission's, vision. And I want to
Yeah.
make sure that if you guys are like, no, I don't want to see a second door from the street, then that's what I'll do. But if you're
I
kind
think
of
the
like, well, it
language,
just needs to be more subordinate than the other one, then, and that's kind of what I hearing from you. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Lisa.
no, you're good. I agree. I think the intent is captured with this statement, that it needs to be subordinate. That's my opinion. And so I'm comfortable with that. I think it captures our intent completely. It's just whether or not it gets tricky over time to administer, but
How
be
do
interested to hear from others.
yeah, how do corner lots work? I mean, that means you can't face, I mean, if the primary address like ours is facing Coal Creek, then we couldn't have one facing Fourth, or?
No, I think you have a front. I mean,
think
how
you
I would
could.
interpret that is that, like your front faces one street and your secondary access faces the other. So,
That's subordinate.
yeah, but,
Yeah,
and
you
you're
don't
addressed
want
off of the
two
one
front
street
doors.
that your house faces.
Yeah, you just don't want two big front doors on the front of the house like a duplex.
Right.
Right.
Yep. So we could add some language like as practical or something like that if you want. But otherwise, I feel like,
I don't think it needs it. I just,
okay.
And I'm sure people will apply for a variance and town will be reasonable. I mean, yeah.
I'm not sure how the other commissioners feel. Are you guys okay? Getting some head nods.
Speak up if you're not okay.
Okay.
All right. You want to move on to parking?
Yep.
Okay. So we decided on one parking space being required, and that's an off-street parking space when you say on-site, being required for an ADU unit. In addition to what's required already for the principal dwelling unit, which is 2 off-site parking spaces.
So we don't have that
Steven,
in original time. Go ahead, Jerry.
I was gonna say, one thing I noticed is the numeric sequence of these items.
Oh, good catch.
We have two
Oh.
number 3s.
Oh, 2 number 3s. Yeah, good catch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there are homes that don't even have on-site parking spaces now. So are they therefore not allowed to have a?
No, I think
mean,
what
don't
we
even know
would,
that I officially do. I mean, we've made them because we wanted to get into our garage or buy our garage, but we don't like have a driveway. We just put our cars.
no, it's a good context.
Yeah.
I think that, for this one, it would be if you want to provide one, if you want to have an ADU unit, you need to show us that you have a one parking space off. Whether or not, we need to bring a property into conformance first, that's just like more of a policy item. The town, historically hasn't been that strict in those things, but it depends. I mean, like if you're built over a property line or you're built, to a setback or something like that, we don't let you extend, like if let's say that you had a rear setback of 10 feet and that house is non-conforming and it's at 8 and you wanted to extend that wall, you're not allowed to do it because it doesn't meet code. So parking is a little different, like it's not a structure. It's not necessarily I don't know. It's a tricky one. That's a good question.
Yeah, and how do alleyways come into play, right? So I haven't really been able to figure out, the guy behind us and several people in town have built garages to code recently since we've been here. I mean, I believe they were built with permits, I'm pretty sure, that appear to be right on the alley, right? And they can't be in more than a couple of 3 feet. I don't know what our setbacks.
Then the
are.
garage is the parking space, right?
And then the driveway or the space, like there's like this guy's, his cement driveway comes right onto the alley, right? So he can park his car right there, kind of on the edge of the alley. There are people who park their cars, using some of the alley. I don't think any of us care, it's nice to be able to get through the alleys, but I mean, sometimes people work on their cars all day in the alleys. I mean, you know, it's an interesting situation. So,
What if we changed the language to something like, oh, I'm trying to think of how to say this, but like existing required spaces cannot count to, cannot be used to meet this requirement. So that if there aren't, like if you have a non-conforming property, right, that doesn't have existing parking, we aren't going to make you say add 3 to get your ADU. But if you only have one, like if you already have one, then you have to add another. Does that make sense?
yeah,
trying
I'm okay with the language in general. It's just, what does it mean? And, you know, I don't, I mean, it does make sense to make sure we have parking for people, because that is one of the concerns, but, you know,
It's a
what's
tricky
okay?
one. Yeah.
Can you park in the
It's-
alley partly, you know? Yeah,
We wouldn't want to create a situation where we're putting an ADU on off of an alley when that's like this, that's the only off-street parking that somebody
Sure.
currently has, like if they take away their off-street parking in order to put an ADU on there and then they add one back, then I don't know. It's
yeah, I mean, like the house behind us, you know, they have too many people living in there, but there's nothing we can do about it. And they all park, in fact, the neighbor does too. They all park vertically in to their, they don't park parallel on the street. They all just pull all their cars in. So they have like 1, 2, 3, 4, I think we've seen at least 7 or 8 cars across 2 houses parked, nose in, which is, certainly partly out in the right of way in the street. And most people, we don't care, but is that okay, right? I mean, how regulatory does this become, or do we just not
it's
worry
tricky
about,
when I think that it's been pretty loose for original town parking, like historically. So
like, if we start to create code and tighten things up, then is that okay? Or it's been loose for so long, and do people want to leave it loose? And
well, I'm just sensitive of parking because, we've had some,
yeah,
most recently, like Rogers Farm, there was concerns that, the parking for Rogers Farm wasn't enough and there'd be spillover and affecting original town, and people don't like the parking by the trailhead already. So
that's because we can't park 8 cars in front of the house like we do, right? I mean,
Right.
It's funny, but we've made, that problem's been fixed here. One, because the houses are smaller, right? We have a lot more land, and we're not putting 40% lot coverage on the homes. That's not what's in original town. So there is more room, to pull cars into lots or to pull cars into the alley, or, that room exists. And that's one of the difficulties here, right? Is as this changes and we, like Jerry said, we start building these monster homes on full lot coverage, then these requirements become really important. But when you're adding an ADU to an existing home, they become less important, because it's great, I'll take my fence down and here's a parking space, right?
The way this is written, it appears to me that anybody contemplating building an ADU would have to bring their existing property up to code, because it says parking for an ADU shall be in addition to the required parking for the principal dwelling unit. So if the required parking for the principal dwelling unit is 2 spaces and it's not there, then I think the way this reads, they'd have to add it first.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm questioning that as much as I'm questioning is, what do you account for a parking space, right? In Rock Creek, in a new development, it's a driveway with cement and a curb and a that kind of thing. In Old Town, I'm not kidding you, you take your fence down and you pull your car in your yard, and it's a space, right? You throw some gravel down, and that's what it is. I just want to make sure that we're not suggesting that, I don't even have a driveway, right? I mean, my garage was built in 1954. The first 2 cars we had wouldn't even go through the garage. They were too high, right? Our new cars, they could, but we have sliding garage doors, and they don't open them really, unless you're working there. They're not. And so when we pull into a dirt, or gravel, when we get around to putting it down space, I could put 6 cars in there in that space, because we have so much lot coverage. So it's trying to be thoughtful about what do you mean by a parking space. I don't have a problem with the fact that we need them.
Does our
Okay.
code
So I think I understand your question now, like a little bit better, and I'll try to respond to it more directly. So I think that, and I think David, Commissioner Harper's right, that this would be And I think that it's probably the easiest thing to, I mean, and it's pretty normal for a jurisdiction to require that parking requirement be demonstrated to exist to begin with. And then if it doesn't, then you clarify in your site plan where it is. And then I think more to Bob's question, or Commissioner McCool's question, excuse me, that, you know, we're not going to require them to pave a concrete apron or whatever. For Original Town, it's an appropriate surface. So that could be gravel, it could be, you know, and we don't have curbs in a lot of areas, so it doesn't limit you to having a curb cut and not the same way that Rock Creek has, so your driveway in Rock Creek is your driveway and it's very defined. And if you needed to provide additional space out there, it would likely be concrete and widen that area. Here, the practical application would be to require it on, just like we do now. I mean, an off-street space that fits on your lot doesn't necessarily have a setback from a property line. And it doesn't necessarily have a hard surface requirement. It could be gravel, it could be asphalt, it could be concrete if you wanted to put concrete in, but it's really just kind of a drivable surface.
And does our code doesn't, you 5 years from now and you're gone and we're gone and nobody remembers this conversation. Is there anything in the code that would that would dictate that differently, or is it just not defined at all? Or do
you mean the surface requirement, or do you mean the spaces requirement in general?
Yeah, the property line setback, or is any of that even defined in our code?
There's no setback for a parking space. I mean, so probably defined by not existing, but the surface I'd have to check, and then that might be something that more, it's more public works related, but I don't recall anything that actually dictates the surface for a parking structure, for a parking space. So
I'm looking at the code and it just says off-street parking areas except those for single and two family dwellings shall be surfaced with asphalt or concrete. So it wouldn't imply it has to be, and then it just says other dustless surface. Well, that's for industrial districts, never mind. So yeah, I think there's flexibility on surface.
Is there a size requirement for a parking space?
Yeah, I'm looking at further down and it just says at least 9 by 18.
That's standard, yeah.
Yeah.
9 by 18. That's a long parking space.
I mean, I'd be comfortable with just what's in the code then for what is, defines a parking area. And then I guess, right, like, so the way it's drafted, I agree with Commissioner Harper, the way it's drafted, a property that doesn't have 2 parking spaces to start with will have to provide those plus 1. I'd be comfortable though, I think, going back to, my proposal, which was more, you can't use an existing space to claim the one site, the one spot, but if they don't have the 2 existing, are we gonna make, I don't know that we need to make them put them in, but I don't live in Original Town, so I'm with, I would wanna lean on folks more impacted by this.
Yeah, and some are going to be more impacted than others. I mean, some of us who have, we have lots of room, so I mean, it's not a concern for us. But I know there are other homes that I guess, heck, I even have garages. We don't use them. I guess if that's not required, you have to use them. But yeah, it's a tough one. I think I'm okay with the language.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's probably good as it's drafted, and if there is like hardship situations, then we can look at it more as a variance or something. But I don't know that it's tricky to try to build in exceptions to these regulations till we know what the scenario is. So
that's a good point.
But I do appreciate the thought. I mean, you've got me thinking more than I thought about it when I read it the first time. So kudos. Yeah.
Let's go ahead to what you're trying to accomplish, right? That's, what are we trying to do here, and what's the goal? So
right.
Yeah. So, but I'm okay for now. All right, you want to go on to 4?
Okay. Yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. It's just essentially saying that no certificate of occupancy could be issued for an ADU until a principal dwelling has a certificate of occupancy. So basically it's establishing the primacy of the principal dwelling. Somebody couldn't come out and build an ADU and then never build the principal dwelling, or, you know, which, and a lot of this, our regulations are already kind of based off it. So how would you establish the size for an accessory dwelling unit until you know the size of the principal dwelling? So it's just kind of the chicken comes first. I don't know if, I hope that's not my feedback. I hear something, so.
Is there an assumption that these old homes, I mean, is it just, I mean, do we have COs? Is that going to come into play? You know,
That's my question. So a house was built in 1920,
right?
you know, for these old houses in Superior. My house doesn't have a certificate of occupancy. Does that mean I have to get one before I'd want to put an ADU on my lot?
You probably shouldn't be there, Phyllis. No.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
No, no, that's a good question. Good point.
I mean, we got one when we did our addition, but prior to that, I don't know.
I think we just need an or in here. No certificate of occupancy can be issued for an ADU until a primary dwelling has a certificate of occupancy for new construction, or
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
you know, unless an existing residence is already on the property or something like that.
Yeah, whatever you need to do to clarify
Yeah.
those situations, I would agree. I think the intent's fine, and really, I mean, until there's a principal dwelling, an ADU is the principal dwelling, right? So it's like, you know, I think this is a circumstance where you're like building them simultaneously. So, yeah. seems
It's got to be 200 square feet, though.
great. That's right. Okay.
Well, and we might have situations in original town really where somebody comes in and, you know, they have a 500, 600 square foot house and
Yeah.
they want to build a bigger house, and then they
Yep.
want to convert their existing house into a accessory dwelling unit, and all of a sudden that'll be possible.
Yep.
So in that case, I think that what we would need is, you know, that certificate of, or that ADU allowance, which is that deed restriction in number 8, couldn't happen until you have a certificate of occupancy for your new structure.
Right.
So that's the trick we'll have to figure out. I mean, those are things that I think the intent isn't to prohibit somebody from, you know, building a new house if they can afford it and having an accessory dwelling unit in their old house. It's just, we're going to need some flexibility there.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
But I think you have those two things. You have a certificate of occupancy, and then you have the deed restriction. Like we wouldn't even grant the accessory dwelling unit until, you know, that first house or that second house was built, but we'd have to have some avenue to even allow a permit for a second dwelling unit out there. And we have to review it with, maybe the deed restriction comes in first, but that's just a nuance that I haven't thought through yet, but I can see happening for sure.
Totally. Okay.
All right.
All right, occupancy, we've kind of touched on already. No more than 3 persons shall occupy an accessory dwelling unit at one time. And then the other piece of this is that the owner occupancy. So 1 or more of the property owner shall occupy either the principal dwelling unit or the ADU at all times. And then if the ADU is temporarily unoccupied, the principal dwelling unit may also be unoccupied.
So do you mean do you mean vacant, or do you mean it can have a tenant?
What do you mean by unoccupied? By
I
unoccupied?
mean, yeah, so if the ADU is temporarily unoccupied, then the principal unit may be unoccupied or not be owner occupied, right?
I think, and I didn't check this against the golden regs, I'm not sure, but if it's in there, and I can pull it up, like I said.
Yeah.
But what I recall from our previous discussion was, you know, Commissioner McCool's point is that if he doesn't want to have to be tied to his, you know, he builds an accessory dwelling unit, now he's stuck living there forever.
Oh, right, this was like,
You
you
know,
want to
type of
travel the
thing.
world
So-
and go away,
So
right?
if it's just a matter of like, if you decide to leave and go somewhere, you can certainly rent out your primary dwelling, but you can't rent out both, because then you have 2
Yeah.
rentals. You know, but you didn't necessarily need to decommission your accessory dwelling unit. If you were to travel the world for 2 years or whatever, your primary dwelling could be rented out. It's just, you couldn't have that rented out plus your accessory dwelling unit. It have to be used for something else.
Right. So is that clear the way this is written then? that you can
Well-
rent out your principal unit if the ADU is,
Not
I think we could add that
Temporarily
language or whatever,
unoccupied.
yeah. I think we could add that language in order to ensure that it's clear, kind of like the RM and RL zoning, just to make
yeah.
sure to be extra clear.
Okay, and if you guys don't, well, I'm gonna speak anyway since I'm allowed to, and we're just chatting, but I'm gonna take another crack at my argument for this, mostly partly to practice, because I want to talk to the town board about this, because I just feel like, well, let me just, I just wrote some notes here as to what I was thinking and just see what you guys think of this. I'd appreciate some feedback and whether you agree or disagree or still maintain the same position. What I wrote is, I mean, we've got developers coming in here, right? They're coming into Old Town. They have a lot of money. They're using big dollars to create density. They're building large homes. And the individual owners that are here, I mean, and I'm just going to be blunt here. I mean, most of us here are, we don't have the money to throw up a 40% lot coverage, 4,000 square foot house sitting on our lots. I mean, I don't think that's typical. I don't think you're going to find that happen too much unless, somebody just decides to sell and the person comes in and does wipes the house off and then just builds the 4,000 square foot home that they can fit on the lot. So it just feels to me that if what's going on down here is density, right? We're building downtown. We're building however many WE homes sit right there on McCaslin. We're packing in these big, I mean, my goodness, the homes on First Avenue that we're just packing in. That it just seems like density seems to be the thing here. And so if that's what we're trying to do, I'm not even trying to do, but why not allow original town residents to just take advantage of the economics here that would allow us to, build a home and an accessory dwelling unit, rent them out and go somewhere else. I mean, if that's what we want to do, right? It's easier. It creates attainable housing for people, right? You can't have anything over 800 square foot in the ADU. So chances are you're going to end up like many, like us, like I've got a 1,600 square foot home and maybe I'll have a 500 or 600 square foot ADU over a garage. Being able to rent those out and do something else, gives me an economic advantage that I wouldn't have otherwise. And it just seems, we're surrounded with multifamily, right? We have multifamily to our west, about 4 blocks of that are going to be in there. I don't know. It seems to me like putting that restriction is just taking away an economic advantage for those of us that are here. So that's, I just want to throw that out there. That's probably what I'll present to the board. I just sort of feel like we're doing so much down here and we're just cramming so much in here. It's not going to be a wonderful, it's not going to be a little old original town that we've had for the last, even since when I moved here,
I agree.
I've been here a little while. So I'm just throwing that out there again. I won't harp on it beyond that or argue it, but I'd love some feedback and thoughts on that. So. Or not.
I mean, my thought is if the neighborhood that this is going in feels strongly one way or the other, then I would default to the neighborhood. I mean, I think, the flip side is the argument for property maintenance and monitoring, for noise and all of that, right? So I think there are real reasons why neighborhoods put the owner requirement in here, but if it's not particularly important to the people that this neighborhood is, where this is going, then I don't have a strong preference. If those protections, the economic incentive argument, I don't know if that's super effective. I think it's more about impacts. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but from a neighborhood perspective, I would be more concerned about like regulation of impacts. I mean, to me, there's still an economic incentive by, you get to rent out at least one now, right? That's more than what you've got. So I'm not saying that's not valid, but I think I'm thinking more about impacts, and if having an owner on the property helps regulate impacts for the neighborhood, then I would support it if the neighborhood's concerned about those.
So I kind of agree with Commissioner Ritchie, and to be honest, the one strange thing I've had about this whole ADU discussion is it's felt, and I started with the Planning Commission kind of halfway through that study, but it's felt like this is something we're doing without anyone begging on the door asking for them.
Mhm.
And that could be a misconception on my part, but I think it's a great point. We could either leave it in or take it out, and when this goes to public hearing and hopefully Original Town's really involved at that point, we will hear one way or the other.
Yeah.
Because that's your argument's great, but I know you're one person in Original Town, but I have no sense what the demand is for these there, or whether they're wanted or not.
Well, the issue is that there's a lot of them here. They're not conforming, right? I assure you, there are. Those of us who would like to do it won't do it because we're not going to break that law, right? We're not going to do it, but a lot of people have. There's a number of non-conforming ADUs. There are houses being used as offices. And this did come up in the Northwest Area Plan. That was actually one. The reason we're even doing this is because it was probably one of the highest priority items that came out of the Northwest Area Planning, and it was a direction from the board. So that is a misconception. I mean, we're doing this because we were asked to do it and because it was one of the higher priority things that came out of that process.
Were we asked to do it by the board or by Original Town?
But well, it was a direct. I mean, it was in our work plan, which was approved by the board and a discussion with the board, and it was because it came out of the Northwest Area Planning process.
Okay.
To that extent, it was brought up by the residents because the consultant, who was it, Clarin. It was one of the items, one of the issues they identified.
Yeah, I do recall being resident desire. I think there was pretty clear feedback from the residents during those meetings that it was a resident desire. I mean, I guess my thought on this is I don't want to take it out.
No.
But I would hope that it's a point of discussion by the public and the board.
I mean, the logic, I think, for leaving I think the reason probably why it's such a common requirement is that otherwise you're essentially converting single-family residential zones into duplex zones.
Right. Yeah, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? And when you see what's happening to this area, it's unfortunate, but it's reality. The density is just, I mean, it just continues. The area is changing dramatically. It's just not what it was before. So, it's so yeah, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, David. Commissioner Harper, I agree, and I'm suggesting we're being forced into what is going to happen here because we've not engaged in the planning process. It was even within a really challenging attempt to try to create a planning process, we couldn't get enough attention. So therefore, a bunch of wee homes get put in and, lots get sold and developed, and it's happening really fast, just as I said it would, and it's going to keep going crazy. And, apartments are going to get built over on the marketplace at some point. It's just, so yeah, I'm just suggesting that this world here is changing, and, letting the people who are dealing with it have some advantage is, allows people to stay here longer, maybe move away later, maybe turn it over to their kids as rental property. Yeah, so yes, I agree with you. I think we're changing. But we can go on to 6.
We'll leave the owner occupancy in for now, and then you'll just raise it as a question you want more direction on, or at least consideration of by the board.
Yeah.
Okay. Utility service. This is one that we discussed as to whether or not to incentivize ADUs. We don't require them to have new taps for water and wastewater. So that's one of those things that kind of just makes that a second. So if you have a second residential unit and you have like a duplex environment, then there's a separate tap required for that unit. That's how the units on Maple were built too. So they have separate taps for those. And this, I think you would be disincentivizing ADUs being constructed to require a tap fee, which runs, close to, it's like $38,000 to pay for most of those development impact fees. So that's where we landed on that. I don't know that there's much to discuss. I don't think there was much debate on that one.
No, I think
I-
the only comment I have is that in here, it's a requirement, not it's not an allowance. It's a requirement. So I don't know if we'd want to soften that. If you want to have those separate, not that anybody would, but I mean, do we want to permit people to have?
Allow it to be an option should they want to?
Yeah, if they want to do it, do we care?
I think it makes it easier to sell separately. I think it just makes it really difficult. I mean, I know we have the provision in there that it can't be sold separately, but there'd be no reason to have to if you don't intend to do that. I mean, I can't think of why you'd want to.
Unless you
Depending on where the area-
had desires to sell it
Yeah.
separately, yeah.
Right, unless you wanted that flexibility in the future.
Yeah,
I don't
well,
know why
that's-
you'd want separate tabs.
I mean, I'm leaning that way because if, even came up in our previous meetings was this idea that we could entertain smaller lots, right? In fact, in our work plan, we're talking about incentives and some other things in our upcoming work plan. So, if that is somebody's intent down the road that, hey, if we manage to turn this into a different type of neighborhood, which is where it's going, and we're gonna do 2 3,500 square foot lots instead of one 7,000 square foot lot, then, you can decide to do that if you want. That's, but again, I'm not suggesting we have to take it out, but I don't want to present it as an incentive, but it is, because it's actually a requirement. We're saying it's required, which is a little different than saying it's an allowance. So that's all.
I have a question about that. It says unless the town or applicable district approves of separate connections in writing. Do we know what the Superior Metropolitan District number 1 allows? Do they allow them to be connected to the main house, or will they require them to be separated? And I don't know if that's been answered yet.
That's a good question, and I don't know that I've discussed this with Public Works to that extent yet. I'm now thinking that, if you have an undersized line that, is only suitable for the 2 bedrooms that it's being served or whatever, I just think that in that case, you'd have to upsize your line. We're not going to require you to. So I don't know why we would have, I don't know if that language was borrowed from Golden or why we would need a requirement for, I don't think that there's any scenario where a new tap would be less expensive than just upsizing the existing tap. And that's my general understanding, but again, I haven't run that through Public Works or our finance department to confirm, but I don't think upgrading the line from like 3/4 inch to a full inch or whatever the case may be in order to, add a bedroom or 2 bedrooms or whatever to existing house, which is comparable to what this would be, has ever necessitated, a new tap. So I think we're good. I don't know that language is necessarily, critical, but I don't know that it hurts us either. It gives us a little flexibility.
This is basically borrowed from Golden, except they add, and may not have separate services unless the director determines such to be infeasible. So if your existing utility won't support, if your existing connection won't support the additional unit, then it appears that at least in Golden, you could get a separate line to connect you.
It's like, could we say it does not require separate connections, or we want to really not allow it? I mean, that's really the difference. Do we want to permit it, or I mean, you can use one connection, or are we trying to prevent something else from happening by saying you may not have separate connections? That's probably the question.
Well, you raised an interesting question, right? Like, and I'm just playing this forward. Like, okay, so we go through and we update the zone district standards in original town in 10 years, right? And then what happens if somebody has an ADU? But I'm also thinking configuration wise, like, lots would get narrower, but they probably wouldn't, like an ADU in the back. I don't know. I'm just trying to envision a scenario.
Old Town Louisville, or parts of Old Town, parts of Bowler. I mean, you just don't know where it's gonna go. It depends on the density and, you know, I mean, we have.
Right, but then like you could subdivide it off, but then like you'd be, doing a lot split, maybe if they had an ADU off to the side, then it could be a standalone lot. But then there's also the deed restriction thing, so we'd have to undo the deed restriction. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I don't know why people would want to have separate connections, but we're saying they can't, not that we aren't requiring it. We're being very explicit here, saying you may not that you're not required to.
Yeah,
I
I don't
think
know.
that unless though gives you some flexibility if there was some unique scenario. So I mean, I don't think it's hurtful.
Yeah.
But
Unless approved by the town. I mean,
Yeah.
it could be a lot simpler line, just unless approved by the town, but.
yeah, I don't think we have an applicable district in original town, so it would just be the town.
No, it's SMD1.
For original town?
Yes, for
Oh.
water and wastewater. Everybody in the whole entire town is SMD1 for water and sewer. So I think we still need to find out if
Say both.
that district allows to have a separate connection, or if they have to have their own connection. I don't know that. That's what I'd like to have somebody find
Yeah,
out
we
to
should probably
see.
look at the, right, because if we need to amend those regs to allow an ADU without a full tap, because I agree, I think the intent to incentivize these, I would hate to have somebody want to do an ADU and have a $40,000 tap fee tacked onto it. I think that's problematic
Yeah.
to
that
the
would-
intent.
Okay.
in
Martin
public
says
rate-
that the rules and regulations can be amended if necessary. I just got a text, and that's for the district.
Yeah.
Is what he's referring to. So, but I'll double check that with Public Works and make sure that isn't an issue before we carry that language forward.
Yeah.
All right, hopefully 7 will be easy.
So that's the mobile homes and manufactured homes. This basically says that mobile homes are not allowed and manufactured homes may be allowed as ADUs.
What's the difference?
Mobile home is on wheels and actually like
I don't know, foundation.
permitted by the state. And then when we just don't allow them in original town as is, but a manufactured home, I think that's actually technically also permitted by the state, but that just means that it's manufactured off-site typically, and then delivered in pieces, and then reconstructed on the site. So it's just it's consistent with our building regulations in terms of what is allowed. You can't have a mobile home as a primary residence within original town. We have a mobile home district that allows for those. We don't have it adopted anywhere, but we have code language for a mobile home district. So the ones that do exist in original town are predate the condition or the regulation that's in place.
There's an ordinance out there that needs to be, I mean, you say that, and I brought this up before because what your statement now is untrue. And I can see it raising an argument because an ordinance was passed, and then I brought this up before that, says these mobile homes, our code states or originally stated that, if a mobile home was removed, you couldn't replace it. It had to be, the foundation put in and it had to sit on it. You couldn't, if it was taken out, you couldn't put a new one in, but we've changed that. We took that away. And now these mobile homes, they live in perpetuity. As long as you can take one out and bring another one in, as long as it's 1984 or later, right? And I don't know how that impacts this, or whether somebody could argue that, hey, how come they can take a mobile home out and I can't put one in here? And they're allowed to take one out and put one in. I have a problem with that ordinance. It wasn't understood. I don't believe, in my opinion, that it wasn't understood by a good portion of the new board that went in years ago when that came up. But yeah, I just want to bring that up because you say they're prohibited for use. It's an ADU, but they're being used now, and they're allowed to be replaced, which would sort of indicate that they're not prohibited. So
Well, I guess they could be prohibited for use as an ADU.
I guess, yeah, I guess it could be as an ADU. That's provided they're not being used that way now, but, and you pull one out and you put another one in, or you prevent it from doing that. Right?
Yeah, I think the language is fine as is here.
Yeah.
Whether or not the code needs amended elsewhere is different, but
Well, I'm just, well, yeah, I don't think we'll get a legal challenge on it anywhere, but, you know, allowing ADUs in one place where, I mean, the zoning is multifamily, but the multifamily use is not in place, right? Where they're being used. So it's a weird one, but I mean, I'm okay leaving it. I just want to bring that up because it's something I think needs to be addressed.
Okay.
Okay.
Deed restriction. So this is a little different than what Golden adopted as well. I think we have 4 and they had 7. I think that our attorneys looked at this and confirmed that some of the stuff was superfluous, like not necessary. Like the first one that I recall from Golden was that you can't subdivide a property, but you can't do that anyway with our code. I mean, we don't have an allowance. I mean, I suppose if you had 3 lots and you had a primary unit on one and an ADU on another, you could subdivide it, but then you wouldn't have an ADU anymore. You'd have a principal dwelling that's super small on one lot and regular dwelling on another lot. But the intent here is met because the intent is that if you have one lot and you have a single family home on it and you put an ADU on it, you can't subdivide it. You wouldn't be able to do that with a 6,000 or 7,000 square foot standard lot just because you don't meet subdivision requirements for minimum lot size. So it wasn't seen as necessary to add in here. The 4 that were included were, it shall not be sold separately from the principal dwelling unit. And again, what we just talked about with utilities kind of comes into play with that. It shall be restricted to the approved size. The deed restriction shall lapse upon removal of the ADU, and the restriction shall run with the land and are binding upon any successor in ownership of the property. So those were the 4 that stuck. I'd have to pull up. Let me see if I can do this and still share my screen. You guys still see my screen?
you see the Word doc.
You still see the Word doc? All right,
Yeah.
Let me stop sharing and reshare then. You see Golden's regs now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so they have, let me see if I can shift this over a bit. Okay, so they have 7. The first was the shall not be sold separately. The second was dwelling unit shall be restricted to the approved size. Those 2 are in ours. Certificate of occupancy shall be in effect only so long as either the principal dwelling unit or the accessible dwelling unit is occupied by the owner of record. So basically just saying if you break that or the owner occupancy restriction, the allowance goes away. So that's potentially important. I don't know if Ali wants to or can address why that wasn't included in ours. I didn't have that context.
So we can always include that in the agreement. What's listed here, this is just a minimum. You'll see that language up in the paragraph itself. But as far as the certificate of occupancy goes, when someone violates the deed restriction agreement, we already have the agreement. We don't necessarily have to revoke that certificate of occupancy necessarily. That's really optional. So it's policy for you to decide.
So this is redundant. You think we have the ability to enforce outside of the language here then?
Mhm.
Yeah, I would just lean on staff and the attorney if they feel like they need it to enforce. I think it's the intent's captured in the language, but I don't.
I'm comfortable with the direction from the attorney as well. Where are we here? So D, the above restrictions run with the land, that's included. Again, this E is maybe the most obvious redundancy. that Golden threw in for whatever reason. And then deed restriction shall lapse upon removal of the accessory dwelling unit. Again, if it goes away, the deed restriction goes away. So I think that one's pretty obvious as well. So ours is more, go ahead.
What constitutes removal? What does that mean?
So I will go back. Oops. 1 second. Can't do two things at once. So removal typically is, I mean, it could be the whole structure goes away, or it gets decommissioned to the point that it's no longer an accessory dwelling unit. So that goes back to that building code definition of, you know, bathing, cooking, and sleeping facilities. If one of those elements goes away, it's no longer an accessory dwelling unit.
And what if you don't want it to be an ADU anymore? What if you just want it to be a part of your?
You're not using it that way?
Are you allowed to remove the deed? I don't, you know, I don't know whether that situation comes up, but can the deed restriction go away? Can you just request that it not be an ADU because I'm just going to use it as part of my house now?
Right. So Golden has another provision in their code, and I can't remember what the term was called. But essentially, it's in lieu of a deed restriction, you sign some other agreement that says that I'm building this, you know, addition to my house, or I'm converting my basement and I'm adding a stove element, but it's not to rent out. And I understand that I'm not renting it out. I'm not triggering the accessory dwelling unit. I'm using it still as a single family residence or whatever. So they have another provision in there. I'll just keep flipping back and forth.
That was the declaration of use.
Go ahead.
The declaration of use.
Right. So yeah, it's probably not going to be in their code requirements. It's in the presentation that we showed. So we could adopt something like that in order to kind of capture that other option, and it would actually address the potential for where somebody doesn't necessarily, I mean, it would give somebody the flexibility not to have to decommission it,
Right.
to take it out of use for a certain amount of time and then maybe reuse it as that and re-enter into a deed restriction. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can just see, you know, I mean, especially we did one about the garage and decided, oh, we're going to make that our office, and you know, they're people can make those decisions. I think that would be a good thing to have available, that they can request the restriction be removed.
Ally,
Yeah,
do you
because
feel
we
like
also have that like temporarily unoccupied, right? So if it's like, if somebody doesn't want to rent it out for a year, but they're still going to use it, does that mean it's like you can occupy it, you can't occupy it at all? I mean, I think we all know probably what it's trying to say, but there might be just some opportunity to make that more clear as it's paired with this provision.
Right, and really we're getting the direction from, I mean, this is your guys' ordinance, so what I'm hearing, I guess, is that you guys don't want to be overly restrictive. So when I worked in Boulder County, it was decommissioned. You know, this thing gets built, it's for the specific purpose. If it ever stops being used for that purpose, it gets decommissioned. And what I'm hearing is that's not what we want. We want some flexibility. Is that correct?
I would agree with that.
I'm thinking.
I would agree with that too.
Okay, so Ally, do you feel like that declaration of use is a key component to include in order to allow that type of flexibility?
To me, the declaration of use just doesn't really serve much of a purpose. Someone can build this accessory dwelling unit and not have a deed restriction necessarily, if they're just using it, you know, for personal use, which is what the declaration of use seems to be anyways. So really what the declaration of use comes down to is just an acknowledgement of the code requirements, but not much else. There's not really anything that we would do with that declaration.
So that's
How do-
interesting. Yeah, how would we know that then?
Yeah, how do we allow, I thought this, I guess as I read this, I understand that you
Yeah.
can only get an accessory dwelling unit if you have a deed restriction. So if they don't
Okay.
have a deed restriction, they don't have an accessory dwelling unit. So how does that work?
Clarify your question.
I thought that as I read the ordinance, the deed restriction is a requirement of being able to have an accessory dwelling unit. So you were saying that they could build an accessory dwelling unit without a deed restriction, and I didn't understand that to be the case.
Well, so, okay, I misstated there. So this declaration of use is essentially saying that they have all these components of an accessory dwelling unit. They're just not going to call it or use it as an actual accessory dwelling unit. So it's like the accessory dwelling unit without the deed restriction. And I think if we're going to have all these requirements and have the deed restriction, we shouldn't have this declaration of use.
Then I think the
Does that-
question becomes, how do we, if you have a deed restriction and I come along 5 years later and I say, I'd like to remove this deed restriction and I'm not going to use this as an ADU anymore, is there a way for me to do that? I think that's really what, in English, what's being asked.
Well, and so one way to do it is just take out your stove, like take out the, you know, or to actually do something physical to the bathroom to make it a half bath instead of a full bath or something like that.
But what do you do?
But short of that, you're asking whether or not there's some regulatory procedure we can go through, kind of like this declaration of use.
And get removed, right? And I mean, if you want to make it an office, you might want to leave the kitchen in there, right? I mean, it's. You know,
I think this would be a nightmare for anybody trying to sell the property. Who the hell wants to buy a house? If you're the buyer of a house, I mean, you want to buy something that's got deed restrictions on it? I don't think so.
Yeah. Can we not have this in there and still be required to follow? I mean, what does this buy us having this in here, Allie?
Sorry, say your question again, Bob.
What's the purpose of number 8? Like, what do we have to have it? And
Yes. So the deed restriction, so the ADU is something we're allowing on the property, but the deed restriction memorializes that, and it is an actual recorded restriction against the property. So the ADU ordinance doesn't mean a whole lot without that deed restriction. And anyone who wants to have this ADU would have to agree to that deed restriction.
And how do I get it removed?
You no longer have an ADU. So it's just like Stephen was saying, you would remove those elements from the kitchen, you would remove the bathroom. But as long as this is a separate unit, you would need to have that deed restriction on that portion of the property.
Okay, so I take my stove out, then what? Is the deed restriction just therefore gone by virtue of me removing the stove, or do I have to do something to remove the deed restriction?
Town would have to release the deed restriction, and Golden actually had language in their code about the town being obligated to release that deed restriction. We did not include that language because we don't want to obligate the town to do anything. But if an owner, say if someone has an ADU, they have the deed restriction, later on they decide that they want to release their property from this deed restriction. They take steps to dismantle essentially the ADU, and they could show proof to the town at that point, and then the town would voluntarily release the deed restriction. That would be another document that would be recorded.
So what is the term shall lapse? Like, I mean, is that just, to me, I read that and just that just automatically goes away, that the town doesn't have to actually do something.
So the town would, and I do this all the time with affordable housing units as well, to release those units. And this follows kind of the same process. So it
that's what
doesn't.
That shall lapse means?
No, well, so no, so it's not formally removed until we do file that document removing the deed restriction. But if there's no ADU anymore, if you're not using it as an ADU, then they would just have to inform the town, and the town would file that deed restriction release.
So then what does the term shall lapse mean?
Yeah, what does C mean? What's its purpose?
It doesn't mean much of anything until the town files the release.
So can we word that so that it says what you're supposed to do? That, you know, that the deed restriction may be removed, may be whatever the wording is upon removal of the ADU? Just, and can we require that? I don't like volunteer. I don't know what the heck that means, but I wouldn't want to put it on, right? If a homeowner has clearly taken everything out, they are required to release that.
Then
deed.
the town has to, I agree. I mean, I understand the town doesn't want to be obligated, but I also, you
I
know, if
think
it's,
the town's obligated according to.
you know, within a certain reasonable amount of time or something,
Exactly.
I think that's unreasonable to tie a property up because the town won't take action when the homeowner has complied.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can
So
we,
you want that codified? You want the town's obligation in the code?
If the
release the
town has a
property?
role in it, then I mean, if you want to get that specific in the code,
yeah, I mean, I think if we're requiring this, you know, and you're saying we really need to have this in there, if we really need to have this in there, then we really need to have a way for people to get out legally, you know, and that the obligation exists. I mean, I have an obligation to make it not be an ADU anymore, and therefore the town has an obligation to remove my deed restriction if I do that. I mean, I don't see how it can be any other way.
yeah, I mean, if there's a way to do it so that the town doesn't have to take action, you know, that
Sure.
you know, and if it's this shall lapse upon removal of, right? If that's valid, if we can lean on that the deed
Yeah.
restrictions are no longer in place, if the homeowner can demonstrate that these aren't in place, then the town doesn't have to do anything. But I think if that's not effective language, we need effective language.
Well,
And-
so I think it's just as Stephen was saying earlier, so removal of the ADU. So if the whole structure is demolished, there is no more ADU, and at which point there's no more deed restriction because the ADU does not exist.
But that's
Um,
why
Does
so
the
that's
town have to remove that?
That's
I mean,
why I
I-
asked what removal means. That was my very first question, which is what does removal?
The point is, Ally, that even if the ADU is demolished, there's still a deed restriction
Yeah.
that is recorded.
That you said the town would have to release.
on the unit, which no longer exists.
So it goes away. I thought I heard you say only the town can release the deed restriction.
It can, but only if there's a property that it applies to. So if someone wanted to, so this
So then
shall
the shall
lapse,
lapse language is okay.
it is in certain circumstances. But if someone wants to voluntarily remove the deed restriction because they're no longer using that portion of the property as an ADU, that's the case that they would need to approach the town and have the town file that release of the deed restriction.
And I'm not okay with that being a voluntary thing for the town. I think it,
What other circumstance would there be that an ADU is like? I guess I don't understand the alternative that you're suggesting.
Well,
Like if the only option is the homeowner voluntarily removes it, right? What other circumstance
are
would
you asking me?
there be? No, I'm asking the
No,
attorney.
yeah, okay.
Well, if the town determines that they're no longer using it as an ADU, the town could initiate that process as well, voluntarily release it.
Okay.
But I think the point here is that we just want the homeowner to, without question, be able to get that deed
Mhm.
restriction lifted if the requirements are met. I mean, if I would, especially, I mean, and I'm thinking, you know, the most common one is you put a unit above a garage and you're renting it out for a while, and somebody, you know, you want to sell your house and you want to sell it as a, you know, 3,200 square foot without an ADU that's, you know, a bedroom, and you take out the kitchen and it's now just part of the house, that you're able to get that deed restriction lifted without question, right? If you demonstrate that you've removed the requirements that make it an ADU, which is just a kitchen
Okay.
at that point.
Oftentimes, the deed restriction agreements will address how to also remove the agreement or the
Okay.
deed restriction. Do you want this in the code, or would you like just to address this in the deed restriction itself?
Hey, if the deed restriction has it built in, I'm okay with that. I think
Yeah, me
that's
too.
what we don't know. That's what we don't know.
Yeah, I think if you need administrative flexibility, don't codify it. That's fine.
Okay.
I mean, I guess I would lean on you as the attorney as far as, you know, these mechanisms, as far as,
Yeah.
you know, how it can be released. And I mean, I think the circumstances were I think we've communicated our intent on the circumstances, but from a legal perspective.
Yeah.
whatever the best way to do that is.
I think to address it in the deed restriction rather than in the code is the best way to go.
Okay. Then these 4 items that happen to be in here just are things we want to point out about the deed restriction. Because I guess
Mhm.
technically they don't even need to be in there either because the deed restriction will have them, but this is more for clarification.
Yeah, so these, you'll notice deed restrictions shall include at a minimum. So these are things that the deed restriction must include. Just town is mandating must be in that document, but there will be much more in that deed restriction than just what's right here.
Then I guess if this is the minimum, then I disagree and with it being, it's becoming challenging because I you know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what ends up in the deed restriction. I don't know if legally a deed restriction requires a mechanism to get out of a deed restriction just by the virtue of the fact that it's a deed restriction document. So I'm leaning on you, our attorney. So if this is the minimum, that tells me that these are the only 4 things that need to be in a deed restriction. And I'm saying, no, one more thing in the minimum needs to be in there is the ability to get out of the deed restriction. So but if there's a legal requirement for a deed restriction to have a way to get out of it in the deed restriction, then I'm fine. But you know, the wording is weird, but law is weird. So does that make sense? So if you'll make sure that's clear,
Mhm. So we could
People can
strike
get out.
C, or we could say something like, yeah, I mean, I think you either strike C or it needs a lot of clarification.
Okay.
yeah, the deed restriction may be removed upon whatever the wording is to make sure it's not an ADU anymore. That would feel
Or
better.
it's like terms for release of the deed restriction or something. if
Right,
you need
yeah,
to
that could, yeah,
clarify it,
right.
If it needs
That'll include
clarified in
terms
the
for
code.
Hey, Bob, and you're also looking to have the town committed to recording and releasing that deed restriction, so that you're asking the town to act as part of this requirement?
Well, if the town is putting the restriction on, then I would expect the town to take the restriction off. If the town's not the one putting the restriction on, then I don't care. But I assume if the town's, I mean, I think I'm
Well,
saying the town's putting it on, then the town has to take it off.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, and then to be able to do that in a timely manner,
And
Yeah.
so that you're not impeding the homeowner's ability to do whatever they want to do with their property.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Or it just automatically lapses upon, right? So if there's a way to do it, so if the town doesn't want to bind itself and it's, if the homeowner can demonstrate that it happens, then the town's doesn't have to take action, right? It will just automatically cease to exist under these circumstances. Again, I don't know the right way to do it, whatever you guys think, but
Ally is the attorney for the planning commission. The town has a separate attorney. That attorney may have a different opinion.
true.
Sure. Yeah. But they're the same organization, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess,
They
I mean,
kick off.
whatever you think is most effective. I think
Yeah.
hopefully you understand our intent.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. None of these were easy, Stephen.
This was great.
Yeah.
This was awesome. You've got the ordinance to us. We knocked it. I mean, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we want to, is that it for that? Or do
That's
we-
pretty much it. I mean, I don't think we need to discuss sections 2 or 3, but if you want to, we can.
I have a question. We
Okay.
talked about water and sewer, but what about electricity, gas, and cable or cable?
Mm.
How would that work? Would that come off of the main house, or should
Yeah.
that be in the ordinance?
Right.
That's not, we don't control whether or not Excel requires them to have a separate line. So they'd have to work with a separate, utility providers. I don't know if Ally has thoughts on that, but I guess we didn't refer this out to them, and I don't know that most jurisdictions get into that nuance. It's a fair question, but I think it's more like a property owner's decision if they want to have one bill and, it's not a separate unit of density in the town's eyes. So I don't think we'd require separate facilities for those. We're not requiring them for water and sewer. I think we would just leave that up to the homeowner.
Does the utility language say water and sewer, or does it say all utilities? Because the language says we can't
Yeah.
have separate. So is it clear that it's just?
Water and wastewater.
Yeah, okay, all right,
Yeah.
that's fine then. So we're not sideways.
Do you have
there.
any thoughts on that, Ally?
No, neither Golden nor Boulder includes gas or electricity under this utility service provision. So I think what Stephen said is right on point. It's not really something we're concerned about.
How about the addressing? Does that come into play? I mean, does this become unit A? And how does mail get delivered? Is any of that important in here, or do we care, or?
It's the town's purview, so I would have to get another address for this. And typically, I mean, I would assume, haven't done one, but I would assume we'd address it kind of like the duplexes on 4th and William, where they do have a 402A and a 402B. In this case, we might just add, I mean, the existing residents already addressed is one thing. We don't typically like to change an address. That's really difficult. So we'd probably just add a B or something to the secondary unit, or I don't know, probably just a letter to the secondary unit in order for them to have a unique address.
And then not to complicate the deed restriction removal, but if that happens, it seems like that address should go away, and I don't know how important that is.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And I have to think about the temporariness of it all. I mean, really, they could just have one set of mail delivered to the house, and the owner could be responsible for giving their tenant their mail, you know, and that
Well, like
might be,
emergency services would want a separate address though.
Yeah.
yeah, it's possible. So yeah, we might need a separate address. Something I haven't thought through yet, but when we have that type of thing, I do talk to emergency services as a primary one, you know, most recently for the addressing of downtown Superior and having, you know, an apartment complex with internal addresses. That all has to go through them, and it sometimes takes quite a bit of back and forth in order to get that hammered out. But those conversations will be had.
Yeah.
Any other questions, commissioners? So do we want to see an updated version? Do we want to just have them, staff make changes based on this, or do we want to look at it again? Do we want to do it by email or any?
I don't feel like I need to look at it again unless staff or the attorney wants us to clarify things if it's not clear.
I can go down my list of notes. Would that be helpful?
I just mean when you're drafting language, but yeah, however you want to do it.
Okay.
All right.
Are we moving to approve this? Is this a resolution or are we just reviewing this?
It is a resolution.
Yeah,
There is a resolution. Do we want to hear the changes?
Is there a public hearing that's going to happen before the board then, if it's not in front of us?
you can act on it tonight and send it to the board if you wish to. If not, you can see it again in another month or whenever before. So that's your discretion.
Will
But
will it be a public hearing for the board?
Oh yeah,
It's just not a public hearing for us?
it's a public hearing for you guys tonight.
Okay. I didn't know it was a public hearing, but I guess,
No, it's not a public hearing.
yeah.
I didn't notice it as a public hearing.
Mm-mm.
It's a public meeting, but it's not a public
meeting, not
hearing.
public hearing.
Do
Doesn't
we
need
need it to be a public hearing? Should we have it come back through a public hearing?
I believe I provided the direction that it needed to be a public hearing tonight, but
Yeah, it didn't get published or noticed that way. I didn't even ask for
No.
notification because it wasn't noticed as a hearing.
No, I didn't get that direction. I don't remember getting that direction from you, Stephen. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So then
it's
do we
not a
want to get
public
it?
hearing.
Yeah, let's get it written and get a public hearing scheduled as soon as we can, I guess. And then that slows it down a little bit, but that's the right thing to do, correct?
You
Yeah,
could
that's the
proceed
same.
today.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. You could proceed
Um,
today with just a public meeting.
Okay. And still pass a resolution?
Go ahead and pass the resolution and send it on to the board for the public hearing.
Okay. If that's permissible, I guess that's okay.
Stephen, did you have something to say about that?
Nope.
So then do we want to hear the changes again? Do we just?
Yeah, we probably should, right? Because there'll be conditions of approval.
So if we could read the changes out, so that when we go to pass this, we can say as presented to us recently without repeating them all again, that would be great.
Stephen, do you want to go through your list or do you want me to go through mine?
I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. So the first change is to 16-6-160. The first paragraph, we're going to change residential zone districts to be more specific to RL and RM only. Is that correct? Okay. The second change is in paragraph 2. We're going to remove the language that states that no ADU shall be less than 200 square feet. In number 3, we're going to change design standards to more appropriate language, possibly to the effect of schedule of requirements. We're also going to remove the last sentence regarding landscaping. We are going to correct the paragraph numbering. There's no change to the parking language. Owners must bring up their properties to code. For the 6th change, we're going to add language to paragraph 4, for paragraph 4 to clarify regarding existing structures. Let's see. There's no change to the language in number 6 for utility service. For number 5, did we want clarification on what occupancy means, or were we going to leave number 5 alone?
Leave it alone.
I would say leave it alone.
Leave it alone? Okay, so no change to number 5, no change to number 7, and there will be changes to 8C regarding clarification for what shall lapse mean and also what removal of the ADU means.
Okay. All right. I've got this up. If you guys are okay, I'll just go for it. Let's see. All right, this is a Town of Superior Planning Commission resolution number PC-12, series 2020, resolution of the Planning Commission of the Town of Superior. We're recommending approval of an amendment to Chapter 16, Article 6 of the Superior Municipal Code by the addition of a new section 16-6-160 entitled Accessory Dwelling Units. We have a motion on the table. Do I have a second? No seconds? Is it gonna die?
Second.
Second from Mr. Miller.
Sorry, I had to find the mute button.
And then Phyllis, do you want to do a roll call vote?
Sure. McCool,
Yes.
Ritchie,
Yes.
Harper,
Yes.
Malia,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Whitty,
Yes.
Hardin, yes.
Resolution passes unanimously.
Nice job, everybody.
Cool, thanks, everybody. Awesome. All right, so our final item is our work plan. It's about 10 to 9. Do we want to at least look over this and then we can decide how to proceed, if to proceed? Do we have this due, Stephen? I don't think we got it into like June of last year.
Yeah, the sooner the better. But it's up to you guys. And timing wise, we can kind of go through. I don't know if you've had any thoughts on what you may also want to see. I can pull it up real quick. So number one doesn't normally, can you guys see my screen again? I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. So number one doesn't normally change. Number two doesn't either. We have the Northwest Superior action items. And the first bullet was the accessory dwelling unit. So it's kind of hard to assume what the board rules on that, whether or not there's any other work that needs to be done. So I don't know whether or not you guys feel like keep it, or if you cut it and assume that it gets done this year.
Well, I'm looking ahead to number 4 too, right? Because I think some of these we can kind of get some policy direction on through number 4, which could lead into some of these. I do think the revised, well, the variance criteria feels like it, you know, might be kind of a specific thing we could talk through.
Are we, so yeah, the other
Sorry,
one I'm looking at
just
is bullet
rambling a little.
2. No. I do think, I haven't looked at this in a little bit, but number 2, I don't know whether or not this, or not number 2, number 3, the second bullet, the design guidelines for housing development to include incentive-based alternatives. I don't know if that ship's kind of sailed, or if that's something that you guys want to leave on your agenda as something to look at.
You know, I think that's really tricky to do without more public process. And are we really doing the comprehensive plan next year? Did that get budgeted for 2021?
That's a good question.
Because that I think will take significant time.
And technically, we could touch on some of those items in Northwest Superior
Right.
on that, and then figure out whether they need more attention.
Yeah. The affordable housing, you guys got that passed. That's good.
Yes. I don't know that that's done. I mean, like in terms of not needing any additional work or thought, but it's certainly over the first hurdle.
I like you leaving the attainable housing component on there, because I think what we're doing in Original Town, I mean, I think it's the only place we actually have much ability to create attainable housing.
Well, I would want to know, I guess, before we finalize this, is if the comprehensive plan is happening next year.
Yeah.
Because I think if it is, I'd want to make sure we leave time on for that. If it's not, we probably could tackle maybe a few, you know, 1 or 2 of these other things.
It was pushed to 2022, but I don't know that, I mean, I think the legwork needs to get done.
I think the legwork could be really, I think we could do that. I agree with you. You're probably right. I would be supportive of prioritizing the comprehensive plan review. And through that, if we touch on some of these other things, that feels like a way to maybe hit those.
Okay.
You just want to change the language a little bit on 4?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that they're not, I mean, so I'm trying to remember where we were, what we were thinking, I guess, when we put.
So the little bit of this came out of the market, or out of the Northwest area plan.
Right.
And then, you know, I brought up the ability to be able to put a porch on the front of our house, being 18 feet from the road. So we had discussions around being able to provide some flexibility with people who have existing older homes to do things like porches and additions, you know, that are challenging because of the position of the original house. And I think we were all supportive of talking about those. I don't know where it goes, but
I'm just curious about, I mean, my question that comes to mind, I guess, is whether or not that third bullet really just applies to original town. I mean, so we have people come in, you know, that want a shed in their backyard in Rock Creek or another area, and they can't do it because of either a setback or an easement, or so, you know, the variance language is it's not strictly, you know, related to original town folks. So I don't know whether or not that needs to be pulled out and separated, or if we meant to just look at it in terms of, you know, under the guise of the Northwest Planning project. And most of these are also, I mean, I think you guys want, other than the last bullet, they're more related to original town than they are to the marketplace or the broader area. So we may want to massage this a little bit in order to get it to, I don't know, be a little bit more streamlined, or, you know, move things around a bit. But I do agree that, you know, we were working on the comprehensive plan update. You're going to look at the Northwest area plan, you're going to look at, or the Northwest area, you're going to look at other areas of town. But I also think the code changes are different than the comprehensive plan update. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the variance language, if we look at it, could be universal. I don't know that it has to be targeted toward original town. I think there's probably ways to draft the language that can contemplate, you know,
Well,
different scenarios.
This particular bullet is under the general heading of Northwest Superior Planning Project Action Items. So it came out of that study, really, which is why I think the original town reference is in bullet 3. We were looking at what we were going to do that came out of that Northwest Planning, the items that we were going to address that came out of that particular plan. It wasn't really intended to address all the possibilities of the wider area of Superior.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to looking, you know, to expand bullet 3. I mean, and that's mostly on the recommendation of Stephen. If the town is being faced with those requests, and you know, we want to talk about those and see, I'm okay widening that a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't want to go crazy, but you know, then the design guidelines for housing development, I don't know if we want to go there. I'd probably be more interested in the comprehensive plan being completed, the update being completed before figuring out whether we want to change or provide any guidelines for housing.
okay.
Because if the comprehensive plan comes back and says, you know, we want to create density in original town, then that changes how we look at it. Or we want to make original town stay original, that changes it. I mean, I think the comp plan will drive that.
Mhm.
Well, we can reorganize these and move 4 above 3. We can amend the first bullet to kind of, you know, allow for it, and then maybe evaluate the implementation of, should it be approved. I think maybe cutting bullet 2 seems to be kind of where we, you know, the direction we got. I think this was adopted,
Yeah.
and then the direction we got from the board was focus on accessory dwelling units. Design guidelines weren't a high priority from them.
Yeah.
From them.
Could you throw that underneath the comprehensive plan, maybe just as we don't want to lose this. I just don't want to lose that idea in the comprehensive plan. If that's okay with everybody, just so it doesn't get shuffled off by the wayside.
Doesn't get lost.
Okay.
Yeah, but make it part of the comprehensive plan, you know, make it part of the comprehensive plan review. And it might go away, I just don't want to lose it. Stephen, when did the comprehensive plan get bumped again?
It got bumped to 2022. When did it happen?
Yeah, when did that get bumped? Feels like it's getting bumped.
Say what?
It's gonna be 10 years.
Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't at the hearing, but those hearings generally occur. Those decisions probably occurred over the last
Few months.
2 months. Yeah, no, so that budget gets set, I mean, it gets discussed over the summer and it usually gets finalized, even towards now. But because of the election cycle,
Yeah.
that usually gets pushed up before the election so that it all gets finalized before we have that break. So it probably got done either into September or early October. But I wasn't at that board meeting.
Okay.
Or didn't participate in that part of it. So, yeah, and I get that. I guess I feel like and I'm not just saying that like as a practice, like for the other bullet about non-conforming uses and variances. I just don't know how we strategically allow original town to have more latitude on variances than we do anywhere else. So from a practicality standpoint, it seems unusual I understand that like a historic residence or non-conforming situations, I think that there's language we can use. It's just in my mind, this is geared towards original town, and I think it needs to apply to maybe a broader area in order just to be on solid footing and changing anything in the code that really applies to the entire community, not just to one specific area. But that's something we can think through and work through as we look at it more. So that was more of a train of thought than direction. So I just wanted to clarify where I was coming from.
Could we just remove the line for 3 and move work with staff to develop recommendations and make that number 3, like just remove that first line, Northwest Superior Planning Project action items. Let's get rid of that, bring work with staff up to number 3 and then move those other bullets.
Yeah.
And underneath it so that they're more townwide and I think even the third bullet could even stand on its own potentially, but either way is fine.
Strange.
Yeah, your bullets are working weird.
Yeah, I don't know why it broke like that, but I'll fix it. I'll do my formatting in private.
There you go. Yeah.
So
That third bullet, I think could stand on its own because it's not really working with you to develop recommendations. It's more about getting updates from where where that's going at this point. But.
You want it in any particular order, or do you care where it gets inserted?
I don't care.
I don't view this as priority. I think it's just a list.
Yeah.
Correct. A list with poor formatting.
Yeah, you have some work to do in your formatting.
Look at that, perfect.
I'm glad this happens to somebody other than myself.
Yeah, no
I'm gonna
kidding.
use the old format painter trick and see if it brings it into conformity. There we go. All right.
Nice.
It didn't do anything. It only worked once. No. So strange. Okay. I'll just redo it later, but that's what we're looking at. Is there any other changes as you guys see it? And I'll change this to.
Anything that any other commissioners have on their mind that we should be thinking about or working on?
I just always think like it's strange that our code doesn't require the zoning code amendments to come through us first, but that's just a procedural thing. Like our code doesn't require anything that's in Title 16 to come through Planning Commission first.
And I get notifications on that and changes get made that we never see. Surprising.
Yeah, I mean, it's consistent with our code. So I would just want to ask the question at the board at some point, like, do you want zoning code amendments to come through us first or not? Like, do they want us to take a stab at it first, like we did on the ADU thing? Or not? Because there's some things in there that I wish we could work through, but I also know that staff is busy and has limited time, and that's an added layer that if the board doesn't feel is needed. Same thing for like the major capital improvements, like 88th Street didn't come to us. I'd consider that a pretty major capital improvement. But I know it's also added time to projects and process.
If commissioners don't know, if you don't have a login to the Superior Municipal Code, If you set yourself up with a login, you can get notifications when changes are made to the code.
So that seems like more of a question to broach
Yeah.
with the board than a list item. Okay, just want to make sure I'm following.
Yeah, I think that's more of a question for the board. And then two, I guess, is if we're not going to bring major capital improvements to planning commission, then we should take that off our list. So I think that's been on here a couple of years, and unless it requires a PUD, they're not coming to us.
Just because they haven't in the past, I guess I wonder if we still give up.
I would love to see these types of projects. I just feel like we leave this on here every year and we ask for that and then they don't happen.
Yeah.
So like if we're not going to do it, then don't put it on the list. But I think I would love to be able to review and work through those.
Yeah, maybe that's, I mean, this should be board approval, so maybe we could just be a little more, can you please be serious about looking at our plan? And if you don't want us to do number 2, let us take it off.
Yeah.
Okay. Clarification I got via text was just that the 88th Street project was viewed more as a maintenance project. It's an existing street versus a major capital improvement. So
I would
I think that there was
disagree
a
with bike lanes and sidewalk design and landscaping. I would
Agreed.
consider that a major capital improvement.
so understand. So we'll leave it on there, and you guys can, you know, hopefully have a discussion about that purview expanding, and you can also bring up your interest in code changes, playing a bigger role in code changes, but that won't be on. So we have one that's on the list and one that's off the list.
Right.
Are we good with that approach, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's good. You guys are, this will be the earliest we've done it. So they always, I mean, and I think I'm a little delinquent. I think other committee liaisons try to get this done before the end of the year. And lately we've been so busy that it's pushed into the beginning of the new year rather than the end of the year before. So this will go to the board and we'll certainly notify you when. I think it'll probably likely be the second meeting in January, but I'll certainly update you guys on that as well.
Cool. Great. Nice job.
All right, thank you, thank you. Anybody have anything else?
I just have a curiosity question, which is, are you hearing anything from Ranch Capital about blocks 2, 5, and 8?
Nothing on 2, 5, and 8 from Ranch Capital at this point. I know that Commissioner Whitty was hoping for an update on just the broader development projects within town, and I can give you guys the information that I have on that. And I think most people are mostly concerned with downtown Superior, but I can provide a broad overview of what's happening. So I think you know, if anyone's driven by there, you see the amount of grading that's kind of going on south of blocks 14 and 15, and that's the toll development. So that's proceeding at pace. They had a lot of the overlot grading to do, excavation and then grading, and they're moving into their utility infrastructure installation at this point. Once that's in, they're going to start with their, I don't know if you guys remember the color diagram that they provided with their application, but they have a phased, I think it's 4 phases of their development, where they'll be bringing, you know, various components of their single family homes and their townhomes online, and then the associated street and utility infrastructure. Phase 2, if I recall correctly, will get Promenade all the way through and connect with the location on the southeast corner that allows for the tie-in with 88th Street. So that's proceeding at pace. We still have Thrive building on blocks 14 and 15. 14 is kind of under construction at this point, and 15 will come next. Thrive's all done with blocks 26, and then, you know, the rest of block 26 and 27 you guys looked at in October. That board meeting for that will occur on the 14th of December. And then moving north into downtown we have the infrastructure going in. I think that's going to start for the improvement around the Morgan Ranch application. So there were two phases to that application. There was the kind of the blocks that were approved for Morgan Ranch that developed everything vertically, you know, Main Street, the plaza, parking structure, civic space, and the apartments that were all proposed. We don't have a date for that to start. We don't have, I think we had one building application came in before, and it was for the wrapped parking garage, but that project's more or less on hold until we get anything from them on when they intend to proceed. Ranch, separately from their kind of group with Morgan, is proceeding with infrastructure and the surrounding streets. And there were timelines that were established for the parks 1 and 2 to be done, the bridge over Marshall Road to be done, and then the various kind of street infrastructure around it. And that construction might begin as early as this month. But the timelines that I've seen for that basically have, and that's a phased approach too, and that's partly out of necessity in terms of tying in utilities, disrupting streets, leaving other streets open so that access stays in place for existing users down there as well as existing residents. But that time frame for that construction that I saw last will occur over 2021 through 2024. So with, you know, the parks and the bridge over Marshall Road, I think being constructed in the next 2 years, maybe even the end of next year. I don't remember the exact dates that were established, but that's one of those two pieces are part of the initial phase of that development. And they have specific timelines. I want to say it was the end of 2022 that had to be done. So, but I don't have that in front of me.
Stephen, can you explain that? That's one of the things, because, and I could be wrong because I got my dates all with this whole COVID thing going on. I expected to see more development, especially on the north side there during 2020. And maybe I was just not listening properly and stuff. But are there specific dates that they have to be done with what we approved, or they have to come back, or how does that work?
So there is a vested right that gets run with the property, and typically it's like 3 years from the time of a final development approval, but the vested right that runs with the PD is different. I don't know if Ali knows those details yet. We haven't really had to get into it because typically we have an approval and then we have construction. Right. So I haven't looked at those. I do think that they're different from what I recall, and I think their vested right probably extends further than the 3 years. Ali, do you know that offhand or no?
I don't. I think
Okay.
we'd have to go into the documents to see what was stated in there.
Yeah, and I don't know if the PD kind of carries over for the FDP and all of that stuff, but the PD was, you know, written in order to get, they had to have a certain amount of that development done by a certain time, and that time I think was 2018, and they vested on that portion of it, and I think it kind of carries through if I'm remembering correctly, but I'd have to look into that further. But we can't control when they start construction necessarily, and we can't control, you know, when their financing is in place for that construction. So, you know, certainly we'll be looking at it if there is something that lapses or potentially could lapse within a 3 or 5 year time frame. But I don't think that's on anyone's real radar yet. So I think that, you know, the discussions that I've been aware of has been that, you know, that this is temporary, and that, you know, that project in some form will, the expectation is it'll still get built.
Okay, I just have to assume the financing got a lot tougher. The retail market is getting worse, and depending how long it just concerns me that this thing could go on for a while and not be built. But if we have back end, that's
yeah, I certainly understand. Yeah, but those factors are certainly in play too.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand that because I didn't know the answer. So.
we have new planning commissioners?
We've had 2 inquiries, 1 formal application, and I'll follow up with the other person that inquired to make sure that they either didn't want to apply or found the application. But I don't know if I think that's targeted for the last I looked on the look ahead. That's consideration of the applicant that came in, and hopefully another applicant or 2 is scheduled for either the first or second meeting in January for the town board. But we pushed with those blasts. So I mean, and word of mouth is also great if you guys have anybody that you feel like would be good candidates. But we are trying to get that full, or our commission full, as soon as possible.
I know it's not a good time for a lot of people to be taking on extra responsibility. I know maybe it's a great time for some people. I know I just don't have any free time.
No one wants to take on another Zoom meeting either. So I mean, there's that, right?
Yeah.
True. Well, thank you for all of your hard work on this.
Thank you guys. I appreciate your time and everything. And you guys did a lot to get through this tonight and to get through that ADU recommendation so quickly. So that's great.
All right, I guess if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thanks, everybody.
Allie, do we need to make a formal recommendation or anything on the actions to either take the work plan forward or the resolution?
Work plan, no. Resolution, they adopted the resolution, and I think, let's see, the resolution language itself,
No
Yeah,
formal votes
recommending it.
required? Okay,
no, I don't know.
okay.
Right?
Well, actually, did we already, we took a vote,
We
we took
voted.
a vote on the resolution, didn't we?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was
Yeah.
probably texting to see what the requirements were. Oh, my bad.
Wanted to make sure that
I
happened.
didn't
I'm
have to
pretty
vote. Yeah.
Well,
It
thanks.
basically boils down to the same thing that we just talked about, that you guys don't take action on chapter 16. So that's what I was confused about. And I didn't get looped into the resolution. So I just didn't know. But that's remote work. We're working for you for communication. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Stephen, thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe.